Christmas night had always been loud for everyone else, families laughing, glasses clinking, music spilling from open windows, but for me, it arrived quietly, like a snowfall that never quite touched the ground. The city outside my apartment glowed with decorations, red and gold lights reflecting off wet pavement, but inside, the silence felt heavier than the winter air. I sat curled on the couch with a mug of cocoa gone cold, the television playing a cheerful holiday movie I wasn't really watching. Every smiling face on the screen felt like a reminder of what I didn't have that night. No parents calling, no friends knocking, no plans except waiting for the hours to pass. I told myself it was fine. I was used to being alone. Still, there was something about Christmas that made loneliness echo louder. I lived in a modest apartment on the edge of the city, the kind of place people passed without noticing. That was exactly why I'd chosen it. After everything I'd been through, anonymity felt like safety. My past wasn't dangerous in the dramatic sense, no secret enemies or hidden riches, but it was heavy enough that I'd learned to keep my world small. A quiet job, a quiet home, and routines that didn't invite surprises. Christmas was the only night of the year that disrupted that routine, filling the streets with strangers and memories I tried hard to forget. I stood up to turn off the TV, deciding sleep would be kinder than pretending to enjoy the movie, when a sharp knock cut through the room. At first, I thought I imagined it. No one knocked on my door, especially not at night, and definitely not on Christmas. I held my breath, listening. The city hummed faintly beyond the walls, a siren in the distance, laughter from somewhere far below. Then the knock came again, slower this time, deliberate, heavy enough to vibrate through the door. My heart began to race, instinct screaming that something was wrong. I hadn't ordered food, wasn't expecting a package, and none of my neighbors would come unannounced. I stepped closer to the door, my hand hovering over the lock, and asked the only question that felt safe. "Who is it?" For a moment, there was nothing. Then a voice answered, calm and deep, carrying a confidence that didn't need to raise itself to be heard. "I believe this is your apartment," the man said. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late." The words were polite, almost gentle, but there was an authority beneath them that made my stomach tighten. I peered through the peephole, expecting to see a drunk neighbor or a lost delivery driver. Instead, I saw a man standing perfectly still in the dim hallway light, dressed in a dark coat that looked far too expensive for my building. His expression was unreadable, his eyes focused on the door as if he already knew I was there, watching. I should have walked away, locked the deadbolt and pretended I wasn't home. But something about him held me in place, not fear exactly, but curiosity mixed with a strange sense of inevitability. I cracked the door just enough to speak, keeping the chain on. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that filled space without effort. His eyes softened slightly when he saw me, and for a brief second, I caught something unexpected there, relief. "My name is Luca Moretti," he said, as if that should mean something to me. When it didn't, he continued, "I'm looking for a woman who used to live in this building years ago. I was told this apartment might be connected." The way he paused before the last word made me uneasy. Moretti. I'd heard that name before, whispered in news reports and half-joking conversations, stories about a powerful figure in the city's underworld, a man people called the Mafia King. My grip tightened on the door, and every sensible part of me told me to close it immediately. "I think you have the wrong place," I said quickly. "No one like that lives here now." He studied my face, not in a threatening way, but as if committing it to memory. The hallway felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. After a long moment, he nodded. "Perhaps," he replied. Still, I had to be sure. He took a step back, giving me space, and I realized he'd been careful not to crowd me from the start. That alone confused me more than if he'd acted aggressively. He glanced down the hallway, then back at me. "I won't take more of your time. Merry Christmas." I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding as if I'd run a mile. Merry Christmas. The words echoed in my head, surreal and out of place. I told myself it was over, that I'd just had an odd encounter and nothing more. But as I slid down to the floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the quiet life I'd built had cracked, just slightly, letting something dangerous and unexpected seep in. Outside, the city lights flickered, and somewhere down the hall, footsteps faded away. I spent the rest of the night awake, staring at the door, knowing with a certainty I couldn't explain that this would not be the last time Luca Moretti knocked on my life. Didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the building, every distant sound from the street below made my pulse jump. By the time morning light slipped through the thin curtains, my mind was still replaying the image of Luca Moretti standing outside my door, calm, controlled, completely out of place in my small, carefully hidden world. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that powerful men didn't just wander into forgotten apartment buildings looking for ghosts from the past. But deep down, I knew better. Men like him didn't move without purpose. If he had come here, it meant something I was suddenly a part of, whether I wanted to be or not. The day after Christmas moved slowly, like the city itself was still half asleep. Streets were quieter than usual, shops closed, people nursing the remains of celebrations. I went through my routine on autopilot: shower, coffee, a quick breakfast I barely tasted. My phone stayed silent, which should have been comforting, but instead made me more aware of how alone I truly was. I avoided looking at the door as I left the apartment, half expecting to find Luca waiting in the hallway again. He wasn't there. Still, the memory of his eyes followed me all the way down the stairs. At work, I couldn't focus. My job was simple, mostly paperwork and data entry for a small logistics company, the kind of place where no one asked personal questions. Normally, I like that. That day, every tapping keyboard and ringing phone felt distant, muffled by my thoughts. I caught myself glancing at the clock, counting the hours until I could return home, even though the idea of being back in that apartment made my chest tighten. Around midday, my coworker asked if I was okay. I smiled automatically and said I was just tired from the holidays. It was easier than explaining a fear I didn't fully understand. By the time I finished work, the sky was already dark. Winter days were like that, short and unforgiving. I walked home instead of taking the bus, hoping the cold air would clear my head. Snow crunched beneath my boots, and festive lights still blinked from balconies and storefronts, stubbornly cheerful. I wondered what Luca Moretti's Christmas had looked like. A man like him probably never spent holidays alone. The thought surprised me, and I shook my head, annoyed at myself for thinking about him at all. When I reached my building, something felt off immediately. A black car was parked out front, sleek and unmistakably expensive, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. It didn't belong there. My building usually hosted rusted sedans and delivery vans, not vehicles that looked like they'd rolled straight out of a high-end magazine. I slowed my steps, my instincts screaming. I considered turning around, walking past as if I lived somewhere else. But before I could decide, the car door opened, and Luca stepped out. He looked different in daylight, still intimidating, but less shadowed, more real. He wore a tailored coat, his dark hair neatly styled, his expression serious but not hostile. He didn't approach right away, as if giving me the choice to walk away. "I was hoping you'd come home soon," he said when I stopped a few feet away. His voice carried easily in the quiet street. My heart hammered, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. "You can't just wait outside my apartment," I said, trying to sound firm. "You said you had the wrong place." "I did," he replied calmly. "And I don't like leaving things uncertain." He glanced around, then back at me. "May we talk inside? I don't want to draw attention." Every sensible instinct told me to say no. To call someone, to run, to demand he leave. But another part of me, the part that had opened the door last night, knew that refusing him might only make things worse. After a long pause, I nodded and unlocked the door. Inside, the apartment felt smaller than ever with him in it. Luca took in the space with a quick, assessing glance, then removed his coat, folding it neatly over his arm like he belonged there. "I won't stay long," he said. "I only need answers." I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter for balance. "Answers to what?" I asked. He studied me for a moment before speaking. "To who you are," he said simply. "And why this address keeps leading me back to you." The words sent a chill through me. I shook my head. "You're mistaken. I'm no one. I moved here years ago because it was cheap and quiet." He smiled faintly, not unkindly, but not convinced. "That's what everyone says," he replied. "But you reacted last night like someone who knows what my name means." I hesitated, then sighed. "Everyone knows your name," I admitted. "It's hard not to." His smile faded, replaced by something more serious. Then you understand why I'm careful, he said. And why I don't believe in coincidences. We stood there in silence, the weight of his presence pressing down on me. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something vast and dangerous, a world I'd avoided for so long. Luca broke the silence gently. I'm not here to hurt you, he said. But someone connected to this apartment matters to me. And until I understand why, I can't leave you out of it. The way he said it made it clear, my quiet life was already unraveling. And the Mafia King, for reasons I didn't yet know, had decided I was part of his story now. Luca's words lingered in the air long after he said them, heavy and unsettling. I tried to process what he was implying, but my thoughts kept circling back to one undeniable truth: a man as powerful as Luca Moretti didn't walk into someone's life without reason. I swallowed hard and straightened, forcing myself not to look as small as I felt in front of him. I don't know anyone who would matter to you, I said carefully. I've lived here quietly for years. If this place has a past, it's not mine. He watched me closely, as if weighing every word, then nodded once. That may be true, he said. But someone connected to you lived here before you. And that connection is dangerous. He explained just enough to unsettle me further. Years ago, a woman had lived in this apartment under a different name, someone who had briefly crossed into his world and vanished before he could find her again. She hadn't been involved by choice, he said, but her disappearance had left unanswered questions, and enemies who believed she still held something valuable. When my lease brought his people back to this address, it raised alarms. I needed to see who lived here now, Luca said. And whether you were at risk. The idea that I could be in danger because of someone I'd never met made my stomach twist. So what now? I asked quietly. Do I just wait for trouble to show up? Luca didn't hesitate. No, he said. You let me protect you. The words were spoken with a certainty that left little room for argument. I laughed softly, more from disbelief than humor. Protect me from what? I asked. And why would you care? His gaze softened, just a fraction. Because I brought this risk to your door, he replied. And because Christmas or not, I don't abandon people caught in my world. There was something in his tone, an unexpected sense of responsibility, that made it hard to dismiss him as just a ruthless man. Still, the idea of relying on him terrified me almost as much as the danger he described. Over the next few days, Luca's presence became a constant in my life, subtle but unmistakable. He didn't move into my apartment or hover over me, but I noticed the changes. A black car appeared down the street whenever I left for work. Unknown numbers called once and hung up. The building's broken hallway light was suddenly fixed. When I confronted Luca about it during one of his brief visits, he didn't deny anything. I don't want you scared, he said. But I won't apologize for being cautious. I told myself I hated it. The loss of privacy, the reminder that my safety now depended on a man I barely knew. And yet, I slept better than I had in weeks. As the tension in my life grew, so did my awareness of Luca as a person, not just a powerful name. He was always composed, always controlled, but there were moments when that control slipped. Once, when I mentioned how strange it felt to have Christmas pass without anyone, his expression changed. Holidays aren't what they're supposed to be for people like me, he said quietly. It was the first time he'd hinted at loneliness of his own, and it surprised me how much it resonated. Another time, I caught him smiling faintly at a photo of my parents I kept on the shelf, as if imagining a life he'd never had. One evening, a week after Christmas, everything escalated. I was walking home when a man stepped out of an alley and grabbed my arm. It happened so fast I barely had time to scream before Luca's car screeched to a stop beside us. In seconds, Luca was there, his presence radiating a calm menace I'd never seen before. He didn't raise his voice or throw a punch. He simply spoke, low and cold, and the man backed away as if facing something far more dangerous than he'd anticipated. By the time it was over, my hands were shaking, and Luca was holding my coat around me, his touch steady and grounding. That night, sitting in my apartment with a cup of tea I couldn't stop spilling, the reality finally sank in. This isn't going to stop, is it? I asked. Luca met my gaze, his expression honest. Not until I end it, he said. And that means you can't stay here anymore. The idea of leaving the one place I'd considered safe hurt more than I expected. Where would I go? I asked. He hesitated, then answered simply, with me. The words were not a demand, but an offer, and perhaps a warning. I stared at him, heart racing. Going with Luca meant stepping fully into his world, a place I'd spent my life avoiding. But staying meant waiting for danger to return. Luca extended his hand, not touching me, just offering. I won't force you, he said. But I won't lie to you either. You're already part of this. As I looked at him, I realized the choice before me wasn't about safety alone. It was about whether I was willing to let my carefully guarded life change forever. And standing there, facing the Mafia King who had knocked on my door on Christmas night, I knew nothing would ever be simple again. Didn't answer Luca right away. His hand hovered between us, steady and patient, while my thoughts raced. Leaving my apartment felt like surrender, like admitting that the quiet life I'd built was no longer mine. Yet the memory of the stranger's grip on my arm was still too fresh, my skin aching where fear had settled in. Slowly, I placed my hand in Luca's. His touch was warm, grounding, not possessive. He didn't pull me closer or tighten his grip. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging a decision he already understood the weight of. "We'll do this carefully," he said. "You'll have control, always." Within hours, my life shifted. Luca insisted on moving only what I truly needed, promising everything else could be retrieved later. His efficiency was unsettling. Calls made quietly, instructions given without urgency, results appearing almost instantly. A car waited downstairs while I packed a single suitcase, my heart pounding with every item I chose to leave behind. When I took one last look at the apartment, it felt strangely hollow, like a chapter closing without ceremony. Luca watched me from the doorway, respectful of the moment. "You can come back when this is over," he said. "Nothing is permanent unless you want it to be." His residence was nothing like I expected. Instead of a cold, fortress-like mansion, we arrived at a modern home on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by trees dusted with snow. It was quiet, almost peaceful. Inside, the space felt lived in but controlled. Neutral colors, minimal decoration, large windows overlooking the darkened landscape. Luca showed me to a guest room that felt more like a private suite, complete with its own bathroom and balcony. "This is your space," he said. "No one enters without your permission." The gesture surprised me. For a man with so much power, he was careful not to take any from me. The days that followed were tense but strangely calm. Luca kept me informed without overwhelming me, explaining that his people were tracking the individuals who believed the woman from my apartment's past still held something valuable. "They're getting desperate," he admitted one evening as we sat across from each other at the dining table. "Desperation makes people reckless." I nodded, absorbing his words, realizing that fear no longer dominated my thoughts the way it had before. With Luca nearby, I felt protected, but also seen. He asked about my life, my work, the reasons I preferred solitude. When I told him, he listened, really listened, without judgment. Slowly, barriers began to soften. We shared quiet moments, coffee in the mornings, brief conversations late at night when sleep wouldn't come. Luca wasn't always the composed Mafia King then. Sometimes he was just a man carrying the weight of too many responsibilities. One night, he admitted, "Power isolates you. People see the title before the person." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. "Maybe that's why you knocked on my door," I said softly. He met my gaze, something unspoken passing between us. "Maybe," he replied, but safety in Luca's world was never guaranteed. One afternoon, tension rippled through the house as guards moved with urgency, voices low and sharp. Luca found me in the sitting room, his expression serious. "We've confirmed it," he said. "The woman who lived in your apartment was involved in moving information, names, accounts, leverage. She disappeared with it." My heart sank. "And they think I know where it is," I said. He nodded. "Yes, which means they'll try again." His jaw tightened, anger flashing briefly before control returned. "And they won't get close." That night, as wind howled outside and snow fell harder, Luca stayed nearby, not hovering but present. We talked quietly, about small things at first, then deeper ones. I realized how much my life had expanded in such a short time, how quickly fear had transformed into something else, trust, maybe even connection. When I finally stood to return to my room, Luca spoke softly. "You're safe here," he said. "I give you my word." I believed him. As I lay awake later, Listening to the unfamiliar quiet of his home, I understood that my story with Luca Moretti was no longer about chance or coincidence. It was about two people drawn together by circumstances neither had chosen, standing on the edge of something dangerous and possibly transformative. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and uncertainty, a question stirred: what would happen when the danger was gone? Would I return to the life I'd left behind, or had that door closed the moment the Mafia King knocked on it? The first real threat came just before dawn. I was half asleep when the distant sound of alarms pierced the quiet, sharp and insistent. My heart leapt into my throat as I sat up in bed, the room bathed in soft blue light from the security system. Before panic could fully take hold, there was a gentle knock on my door. "It's Luca," his voice came through, calm and steady. I opened the door to find him fully dressed, composed as ever, though his eyes were alert. "There's been a breach attempt at the outer perimeter," he said. "You're not in danger, but I want you to stay close to me today." Downstairs, the house buzzed with controlled urgency. Men spoke quietly into earpieces, screens flickered with camera feeds, and yet nothing felt chaotic. Luca moved through it all like gravity itself, everyone adjusting instinctively around him. Watching him in his element was intimidating, but also strangely reassuring. This was his world, and he knew exactly how to protect it. When he noticed me standing back, he came to my side. "You don't need to see this," he said gently. "But I don't want you alone either." That balance, between shielding me and respecting my agency, made my chest tighten with something dangerously close to gratitude. By mid-morning, the threat was contained. Luca explained that someone had tested the defenses, looking for weaknesses. "It means they're close," he said. And impatient, I asked the question that had been haunting me. "Why don't you just tell them I know nothing?" He shook his head. "Men like this don't trust words," he replied. "They trust leverage. And right now, they think you are leverage." The reality of that settled heavily, but instead of fear, I felt a growing resolve. I was tired of being the quiet bystander in my own life. "Then teach me how to stop being useful to them," I said. Something shifted in Luca's expression, a mix of surprise and respect. Over the following days, he involved me more, explaining things in broad strokes, never overwhelming but never lying. I learned about the woman who had lived in my apartment before me, how she'd been coerced into moving sensitive information and had vanished rather than hand it over. "She was braver than she realized," Luca said one evening. "But bravery often comes at a cost." I wondered if she'd ever found peace, or if she was still running. The thought made me look at my own choices differently. As time passed, the tension between Luca and me grew quieter, deeper. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it was there, in lingering looks, in the way he always made sure I ate, slept, rested. One night, when a storm cut the power briefly, we sat by the window watching lightning split the sky. "I didn't expect this," he admitted softly. "Letting someone this close." I smiled faintly. "Neither did I." For the first time in years, I felt connected, not because I needed protection, but because I was choosing to stay. The breaking point came sooner than expected. Luca received word that one of the men hunting the missing information had been captured. "He wants to bargain," Luca said, his tone grim. "And he wants you present." My stomach twisted. "Why me?" I asked. "Because he thinks fear will loosen your tongue," Luca replied. "But I won't let him touch you." Against every instinct, I agreed. If this was the way to end it, I needed to face it. The meeting took place in a secure location, cold and stark. The man was smug, confident that he still held power. When he spoke to me, his words were sharp, probing. I met his gaze and told the truth, that I knew nothing, that his obsession was misplaced. Luca watched silently until the man laughed. Then Luca leaned forward, his voice low and lethal. "You've already lost," he said. "And the more you threaten her, the worse this ends. For you." Something in the man's eyes shifted, fear, finally. That night, back at the house, the tension broke like a wave. I stood on the balcony, cold air burning my lungs, when Luca joined me. "You were brave," he said. I shook my head. I was terrified. He smiled faintly. "Those two things often coexist." We stood close, the city lights distant below. In that moment, I realized that whatever danger still lingered, my life had already changed. I was no longer just the woman alone on Christmas night. I was someone who had faced the darkness, and discovered strength, connection, and something that felt dangerously like hope. The days after the confrontation felt surreal, as though the world had shifted on its axis. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the large windows of Luca's home, the kind of morning that seemed too peaceful for the chaos of the past week. Yet, even in the calm, I felt an undercurrent of tension. Danger had not disappeared, only been pushed aside for now. Luca moved through the house with his usual quiet authority, making calls, reviewing reports, yet always returning to check on me. His presence had become a constant, a mixture of reassurance and reminder that my life was no longer mine alone. We had breakfast together that morning, something so simple it almost felt ordinary. Toast, eggs, and coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen as snow fell softly outside. I found myself observing him, the way he carefully poured cream into his coffee, the slight crease at the corner of his eye when he frowned at a report. For someone who commanded an empire of fear and power, these small human moments caught me off guard. "Do you ever stop?" I asked, half joking, half serious. "Stop what?" he replied. "Being everywhere at once." He smiled faintly, that rare, unguarded smile. "I've learned to stop for moments like this," he said. "Because even a king needs a pause." That pause was short-lived. Mid-morning, one of Luca's men approached with a message. A new threat had surfaced, one even more insistent than the last. It seemed the network hunting the woman from my apartment's past had grown desperate, and they weren't willing to wait for Luca to find them. He read the message silently, then turned to me. "I need to show you something," he said, guiding me to a private study. Inside, walls lined with screens displayed feeds from all over the city. Streets, offices, alleyways, each movement tracked, analyzed, catalogued. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the scope of his reach. "This is," I trailed off. He nodded. "This is how I protect you." The realization hit me like a wave. I was stepping fully into his world. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally. Every decision, every step, now existed under his shadow. Yet, paradoxically, it felt safe. Terrifying, yes, but safe in a way my solitary life never had. Luca seemed to notice my thoughts. "You don't have to understand it all at once," he said. "Just know that here, you are protected." His hand brushed mine as he gestured to the screens, not a touch of ownership, only a grounding presence. The rest of the day passed in an uneasy rhythm. We trained in awareness and response, simple drills that Luca insisted I learn, not to turn me into someone like him, but to ensure I could navigate threats if they came too close. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally, yet empowering in a way I hadn't expected. With each step, I felt the walls I had built around myself crumble, replaced by something more complex: trust, curiosity, and an awareness that life could be more than routine and isolation. Night fell, and we found ourselves alone in the living room. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows across the walls. Luca poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to me. "To survival," he said quietly. I clinked my glass against his, the sound sharp in the quiet. "To surviving Christmas, and everything after." He smirked, but his eyes softened. "You've adapted faster than I expected," he admitted. I laughed softly, the tension in my chest easing slightly. Maybe I didn't have much choice. As the night deepened, our conversation drifted. From mundane stories of childhood mischief to the hidden vulnerabilities Luca never revealed to anyone, I began to see the man behind the title, the human beneath the reputation. There was loneliness there, yes, but also a relentless commitment to protecting those he cared about. I realized that despite the danger, I was drawn to him, not just as a protector, but as someone whose life, like mine, was complicated and demanding, yet capable of tenderness. By the time I retired to my room, I understood the truth: my life had been altered irrevocably. I was no longer the woman alone in her apartment, waiting for hours to pass. I was part of something bigger, dangerous, and exhilarating, a world I had never sought, yet somehow needed. And somewhere deep inside, a part of me was thrilled that the man who knocked on my door that Christmas night had chosen to stay, not just to protect, but to see me through it. The tension of Luca's world never fully disappeared, but by now, I had begun to navigate it with a strange mixture of fear and confidence. I was learning, slowly, to read the signs of danger, to trust my instincts, and to trust Luca. Yet, even with that trust, there were moments when the stakes became undeniable. One evening, just as twilight settled over the city, we received news of a new development. A man connected to the past woman's disappearance had resurfaced, someone bold, reckless, and eager to claim leverage. Luca's expression was unreadable at first, then sharp, focused, commanding. "This ends tonight," he said. I understood the weight of those words. This wasn't about control, it was about survival. Luca moved with precision, issuing orders to his team with efficiency that made my pulse quicken. I stayed close, as instructed, observing the calculated steps of a man who could command fear without raising his voice. There was a cold elegance in the way he worked, but beneath it, I saw a different side, an intensity that betrayed personal stakes. This was no longer just business, this was personal. And somehow, I was caught in the center of it. By nightfall, the confrontation was inevitable. The man had chosen a public location, thinking he could manipulate the situation. But Luca anticipated every move. I watched from a safe distance, the city lights reflecting off icy streets, as Luca approached the man with calm authority. There were no threats shouted, no weapons drawn, only words, sharp, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. The man faltered, realizing he was outmatched, cornered by someone whose reputation preceded him and whose control was absolute. I felt a shiver run down my spine, part awe, part fear. After the encounter, Luca returned with me to the safety of his home. He didn't speak at first, simply placing a hand on my shoulder, grounding me in the aftermath. "You did well today," he said quietly. "Watching is hard, but important. It teaches you the cost of courage." I swallowed, realizing I was trembling, not from cold, but from the adrenaline of surviving alongside him. My life had transformed in ways I hadn't anticipated, and yet, a strange exhilaration pulsed through me. Danger, fear, trust, and connection all coexisting in a way I hadn't known was possible. That night, after the storm had passed, we sat together on the balcony, the city stretching below us in a mosaic of lights. Luca was uncharacteristically silent, contemplative. "I never expected this," he admitted softly. "Finding someone who could understand this world, and still choose to be part of it." I looked at him, realizing that what he said wasn't just about danger or survival. It was about connection, trust, and something far more personal. "I didn't expect it either," I said, my voice quiet. "But I've learned that some risks are worth taking." As the days passed, our bond deepened. Luca's world was dangerous, full of shadows and unpredictability, but within it, I found a strange sense of belonging. I was no longer the woman alone on Christmas night, I was part of something bigger, dangerous, and alive. We moved through the city together, not just in shadow but in presence, learning, adapting, surviving. Every glance, every shared moment, carried weight, and I realized that the connection between us was growing, unspoken but undeniable. And then came a moment that changed everything. One evening, as snow fell lightly outside, Luca looked at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said. "But I need you to understand something. You've become important, not just to me as someone I protect, but as someone I care about." My heart stopped. I had expected danger, fear, and chaos, but not this, not the raw honesty in his eyes. I found myself searching for words, realizing that the bond we had formed went far beyond circumstances. It was personal, intimate, and real. The realization left me breathless. Danger still existed, threats still lurked, but in that moment, I understood the depth of what had begun. I was no longer alone. The man who had knocked on my door that Christmas night was now intertwined with my life, not just as a protector, but as someone whose presence changed everything. And for the first time in years, I felt that life, dangerous, unpredictable, and thrilling, was something I wanted to be part of. The final confrontation arrived on a night that seemed deceptively quiet. Snow blanketed the city streets, muting the usual sounds of traffic and life, giving the world a surreal, almost otherworldly calm. Luca moved through the house with a quiet precision I had come to expect, his presence a steadying force amid the storm I could sense lurking just beyond the walls. Tonight would settle everything, the loose threads, the enemies, and the questions about the past that had brought us together. And I would face it, not as a frightened woman hiding behind doors, but as someone who had learned to stand alongside him. We drove to a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The black car slid silently over the snow-covered roads, Luca behind the wheel, his jaw set, eyes scanning every shadow. I sat beside him, heart pounding, fully aware that nothing we did tonight could guarantee safety. Yet, alongside the fear was a strange clarity, I was ready. When we arrived, the threat was unmistakable. Men who believed they held the upper hand, waiting, confident in their assumptions. But Luca did not flinch. He had planned, anticipated, and now he moved with the deadly elegance that had earned him the title of Mafia King. The confrontation began with words. Calm, deliberate, precise, Luca's voice carried authority that demanded attention. "You've been chasing ghosts for too long," he said. "The woman you believe holds power does not. And threatening her only ensures your failure." I watched as the men faltered, their confidence cracking under the weight of his presence. Yet even as I felt the tension begin to ease, danger remained. One of the men made a sudden move, reaching toward a hidden weapon. Instantly, Luca reacted, swift, controlled, and decisive. In a heartbeat, the threat was neutralized, every motion a display of his skill, his dominance, his relentless protection. Once the confrontation ended, silence settled over the warehouse. The men had been removed, the danger eliminated, or at least postponed indefinitely. Luca turned to me, his expression a mix of relief and something softer, almost human. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice low, carrying concern that cut through the adrenaline haze. I nodded, though my hands were still trembling. "I am," I said. "Because you're here." His eyes softened, and for a moment, the Mafia King was just a man who had chosen to protect me at every turn, whose presence had become indispensable. Back at his home, we finally allowed ourselves a moment of quiet. Snow continued to fall outside, muffling the city and creating a cocoon of safety within the walls. We sat together, neither speaking for a long time, just feeling the aftermath of adrenaline, relief, and an unspoken bond that had deepened over weeks of danger and trust. Finally, Luca broke the silence. "You've seen my world now," he said, voice soft but steady. "And yet, you've chosen to stay in it." I looked at him, understanding the weight of his words. "I've seen it, and I've chosen you." He studied me then, eyes dark and searching, as if measuring the truth in my words. Slowly, he reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face. "Then nothing will change that," he said quietly. "You're mine to protect, and I'll keep you safe, always." I felt a thrill, a combination of fear, excitement, and deep, unexpected warmth. For the first time in years, I knew with certainty that I was no longer alone, no longer waiting for life to pass me by. I had been chosen, protected, and somehow, in the midst of danger, I had found connection. Over the next days, life settled into a new rhythm. The threats receded, though Luca's vigilance never wavered. I adjusted to his world, learning, understanding, participating in a life far beyond what I had imagined. But more importantly, I learned to trust him fully, not just as a protector, but as someone who had become an inseparable part of my life. Every glance, every word, every quiet moment held significance. And slowly, the bond between us deepened, evolving into something that went beyond protection and danger, something that was undeniably love. On a night that mirrored the first when Luca had knocked on my door, we stood together on the balcony, snow falling gently around us. The city lights glittered below, and in that moment, the past, the fear, and the danger all seemed distant. I looked at him, realizing how much had changed in a matter of weeks. "I never thought my Christmas could turn out like this," I admitted. He smiled, a mixture of mischief and warmth. "Neither did I," he said. "But some surprises are worth everything." Then, without another word, he pulled me close, his embrace steady and grounding. The loneliness of my past dissolved, replaced by a certainty I hadn't felt in years. Christmas night, which had begun in silence and solitude, had transformed into the beginning of a life I had never dared to imagine, a life full of danger, excitement, connection, and love. And in Luca Moretti, the Mafia King who had knocked on my door, I had found not just a protector, but someone who would stand by me through everything, forever. The door that had once been a symbol of isolation had opened a world I would never leave, and it all began with a knock on Christmas night.